Good morning, or maybe it's good afternoon, or good evening. Wherever you are, whoever you are, and whenever it is, welcome back for another one of our 5-minute messages. My name is Brian Steele, and I have the privilege of being the pastor here at St. Paul United Methodist Church in Bloomfield Hills and Hazel Park United Methodist Church. And I'm grateful you are joining us today. Today I want to spend a few minutes talking about something that we don't talk about enough in church: grief. In today's world, church and grief don't go together very well. It's not really part of our spiritual practice. We hear about grief in the outside world. We hear people going to grief counselors and things of that nature. But we don't think that really applies to us here in the church. And especially within the last century or so, we've developed these trite phrases about how people are in a better place and things of that nature. The list can go on and on. And I acknowledge that as people of faith, as part of our grief, we can be comforted that this life is not all there is. One of the reasons I'm United Methodist is that we have this belief of assurance, and we don't need to wonder if we are part of God's chosen. It's a gift. And it's a gift that provides comfort, especially in times of grief. But it does not replace the entirety of grief. And what I want to just be clear about in these short couple of minutes is that grieving is part of the Christian faith. It's a sign of faith. It's the fruit of faith. And here's why I believe this. More than 11 years ago, about 11 years ago, it was August 2012, author and Professor Soong-Chan Rah did some research looking at the music that was played in church services. And he did this by looking at the Christian Copyright International license, CCLI, which is one of the biggest licenses that churches use so that we can play music legally. And out of the top 100 worship songs played in that month of August, only 5 would qualify as lament. Lament is a cry of deep anguish, a act of grief. So churches aren't playing songs of grief. And yet, in the book of Psalms, our book of music in the Bible, Dr. Rah also notes that nearly 40% of those psalms are psalms of lament. And then later on, we also see instances of grief and how to handle it in the book of Job. As Job is dealing with these significant losses, is in the belly of deep grief. And he has these friends come on over, and they sit next to him, telling him what they think he needs to hear. And eventually it's shown throughout the story that the friends were just completely off base. Again, it is a sign of faith to trust your grief, no matter what type of loss you're grieving, to trust that in the hands of God. It is faithful to trust your tears, to trust God with your tears. Some even argue that Jesus himself did that. When in the story of Lazarus, the shortest verse in the Bible is just Jesus wept. And some think that he is weeping over the loss of his friends. Now there is quite possibly more to that particular story. And some don't necessarily see it as an act of grieving over the loss of Lazarus. And I'm not going to go too deep into biblical interpretation, but I do think there are some fair points in that. But at the same time, I also wonder if we don't even like to admit to the possibility that Jesus grieved because it's too much of a sign of weakness. Friends, just a human reality is that the only way to avoid grief is to avoid love. That's not the life Jesus calls us to. Grief and love are bound together. And here's the amazing thing about how God has created us. When we are willing to really enter the fullness of grief, we also learn to love more. God has designed us in such a way that when we grieve, our hearts can actually grow bigger, spiritually speaking. So one of the reasons the church exists is to be a community who grieves well. No matter what the losses are, because what might seem like a minor loss to one person is devastating to another, and what is devastating to another might seem really minor to another. But they are all legitimate losses. So as a church, let's trust God with our grief. And let's learn to be a place of grief for those who are experiencing loss in the world. Well, friends, that's it for today's 5-minute message. Go in peace, knowing that you are loved, whether you're on that mountaintop or in the valley of grief, or more than likely somewhere in between. So friends, you are loved, no matter who you are, where you're coming from today, or wherever you're at in life. Go in peace, and I'll see you Thursday with another 5-minute message.